I have a couple of questions written down, although I think we've covered some of them just in our comments as we have continued. What do you think are key features of the contemporary world that have relevance for contemplative living, and how so? I had given some examples like perceived increased vulnerability in a post-9/11 world, the shrinking economy, sustainability or unsustainability of the marriage between consumerism and capitalism, a shrinking globe with technological interconnectivity. We've touched a lot on all of these. Are there any that you see especially challenging, or can you think of others about the contemporary world that bear on this challenge of contemplative living?
For me, I would just add population density and the loss of the ability to get into nature, because there's less natural sites around to visit to, because we just keep growing and growing and growing and growing. And then the other one is clearly a greater distinction between the haves and the not only in their ability to just have food and shelter, but the educational gap. I think that for me that weighs heavily on me, because it is creating, it's possible to create a world that is so sad in terms of people not having enough to eat, not being able to read, and especially in the United States, where I teach college on the side, and where there's pressures to dummy down information that you're sharing with your students, and that can set me off into a tailspin, and I have to come back and center myself and say, I can do my piece. It's just like when we get bombarded with political ads during an election time. I give myself the little lecture. I have one vote. I know how I'm going to vote. I don't need to watch 14 hours of political advertising. And it's the same for me, it's the same when I'm dealing with those other big issues that I feel attracted to, is that I will do my piece and then let go, because I think it's a disrespect to God's gift to me for the good life that I have and that many people have, not to enjoy those gifts, not to get lost in the pressures and the problems of the contemporary world.
I think one of the perils that I sense is I fear a loss of a sense of the sacred in human life. Worldwide, it just seems like human life is becoming more and more dispensable. At least it feels like that to me. That it's less of an issue than it was before, and I don't know whether it's just because I'm getting older, or that there seems to be more reporting of these kinds of atrocities that go on in the world, but as well as natural disasters. But I think there's a danger that we're becoming desensitized to the loss of life, of physical life, because it's happening so often and so in such large proportions that we think, oh, only 8 people died in that's good, that wasn't so bad, kind of a thing, as opposed to measuring the loss of life now in hundreds of thousands and things like that. So I think that's part of what I sense, is that there's a kind of desensitization to the loss of human life in the world. At least that's what it feels like to me.
Well, I certainly agree with you, John, but I think a part of that is because we are bombarded with so much information. We get in, one day what someone, 150 years ago would have gotten in a whole year. And it's almost like an addict. When your body gets used to something, you need more of it to have an effect on you. And we get so much information of sorrow and hurt that it no longer touches our our soul. And I think that's why 9/11 was so powerful for we in the United States, because here was a terrorist event on our soil that impacted all of us, and so it awakened in us to this vulnerability. And again, we continue to just have so much, and therefore I think again, if we approach life superficially, it becomes like being coated with a repellent, so that the rain hits us and it just bounces off of us if we live superficially. But to be able to reflect on and to spend time, then I think we feel that impact. But again, like Karen was saying, then do we wallow in it, and therefore we're no longer able to be celebrative. And I think what Karen mentioned was such a wonderful gift, is that, again, okay, well, what does God want me to do? And well, okay, I will do the best I can, and then we got to turn it back over to God. One of the things that I learned, a long time after I started preaching, but now preaching every week for close to 40 years now, is that I've learned to yes, with God's help, prepare and do the best, but once it's done, you wash your hands of it because you can't keep thinking, well, I should have done this, or I could have done that, or what. Well, you wash your hands and say, okay, God, use it the way you're going to use it. And so there's that living in that dichotomy, that balance of being aware of things, trying to let it significant touch me, to reflect on it, and then say, okay, God, what can I do, or what do you want me to do? And then do it, but then say, okay, God, take it from there. Let me feel the celebration of today as well. Because if we stay in either one of those too much, we lose. Yeah. We lose it, and so you need the balance, and to reflect and do what we can, and then to let go of it has to be almost a daily routine.
The ability to do that is a very, very difficult thing. It goes back to sort of over-identifying with our avatars, right? I mean, it's like that's sort of what we do, is when we find a cause, or we are working on a cause, we identify with the cause and we become with the cause. And so working to be able to sort of do what we can and then walk away is incredibly hard. That might be one of the most difficult things that we as human beings are being asked to do. And maybe one of the foci of our contemplative tradition, our contemplative practice, is to be able to do that. It takes its toll, I think. It's like a physician or a health practitioner who does everything they can to help a patient, and then recognizes his or her limitations, and they can do no more, and they need to let go and to walk away. Yeah. But that doesn't go without a deep wound to the soul. And nurturing those wounds, caring for those wounds, is an important part of what we need to be doing in our contemplative world as well, I think.
We know that we're always going to have to live with that tension, because the kingdom isn't now, and Jesus sort of left us here to build that kingdom. He helps. We have to stay tuned in a sense, which we try to do through prayer or contemplation and that kind of thing. So I think maybe the other thing, that we have to be realistic in our expectations. We're not going to be the flower children of the 60s, but hopefully we're not going to be in the situation that we are right now either, because there are a lot of things so you don't want to abandon hope or the efforts, but and this is probably a slightly irreverent way to say this, but when I'm thinking about that, I think if you look at Jesus' life, I always say he basically hung out. I mean, he wandered from place to place. He didn't launch any big movements. He just was who he was in the place where he was at the moment. And I think that, in a way, is what we've been talking about for the last hour, in trying to do that in our own lives.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we know, how do we get better at doing that? How do we know what we're supposed to be doing? And like you said, you can do just so much,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do have to leave some to God. Trust that He's there, and His hand is in this. But we don't always see where that is.
There's something about the glitch in human nature that wants us to set ourselves up as the center, to put ourselves in the center. And whenever we do that, we end up becoming disconnected from community, leading into alienation. While the true self, if you will, or this genuine understanding of there is no self without others. We are a network of relationships that comprise who we are, and in that way we are the image of God, because God is a trinity of persons in loving relationship, not an isolated individual existent out there, but a community of persons in love. And that's how we find our genuine selves as well, in community, and it's absolutely essential. But what a temptation we have always to self-aggrandizement, self-focus, the narcissism, where we get stuck on the reflected image, or the self-consciousness that Merton talks about. And the only antidote we have, the beautiful gift that God gives us, is family, community, where we discover God. Well, I just want to thank you all for listening and for inviting me to come, so I appreciate that very much.